Greetings and welcome to the first, what I would consider real lecture or substance lecture for our Political Science 2 course. And if you take a look at that first module, this first mini lecture goes along with the page that is titled Comparative Politics, Subject and Method. And before I get specifically to the notes, I want to say a couple of things about comparative politics. In the intro, I said that comparative political scientists compare almost everything, and let me just talk a little bit about that. For example, some political scientists are interested in what we call the inputs to politics. Inputs. So, for example, they might want to compare how many political parties are relevant in that country. Does the country have a multi-party political system like Germany, for example? Or does the country have a two-party system like the United States? Or does the country have a one-party system like the Chinese Communist Party in China or the former Communist Party of the Soviet Union during the Cold War in the Soviet Union, or the Nazi Party in Nazi Germany, or a zero-party system? A zero party system would be where the military takes over and there are no organized political parties because the country is being run by the military, which occurred in the 1960s and 1970s, for example, in the country of Brazil. So some people are interested in inputs. How many interest groups are there? How many political parties are there? Um, what form of election do they have? Do they have single member plurality systems or double ballot systems? Some people are interested in what we call the institutions of government. For example, what is the difference between a presidential system like the United States or a parliamentary system where they have a prime minister? Is politics different when headed by a prime minister or a president? Or does the country have a meaningful Supreme Court? Germany does, the United States does. Uh, France has a very weak court, and there is no Supreme Court that determines the constitutionality of law in Britain, for example. And then my mentor was interested in the outputs. He believed that the best way to look at politics is not what politicians say, not even what the Constitution says, but take a look at the performance of that system. What is the government spending money on, for example? And that'll tell you a lot about what their priorities are. So you can look at the inputs, you can look at what the institutions, you can look at the outputs. Um, we're going to do a little bit of all of these. We're going to look at politics, that's kind of the inputs. We're going to look at the institutions of government, and we're going to look a little bit at policy, although policy tends to be the element that gets shortchanged a little bit. The second overview that is not in your notes, but I think upon looking at the notes, maybe I should just reference, although it's not exam material, is that when you take a look at comparative politics, it tends to be taught a couple of different ways. One is to teach the course by topic. And most of you took American government, and maybe some of you took American government from me. And topical is the way that I taught American government and is the way American government is traditionally taught in our country. So you may remember I started out talking a little bit of theory. That was the first topic. Then the Constitution was second. Federalism was third. And then I believed I got into the Supreme Court, so that would be an institution. Fourth, civil liberties and rights, that would be an output. And then went to the presidency and the Congress, for example. So I went topic by topic by topic. And there are some courses in comparative politics that are taught this way. So they may compare political parties and use 3 or 4 countries to illustrate differences, and then maybe interest groups and 3 or 4 differences, and election systems and executives and legislatures. And so there are some people who teach comparative politics like I taught American government. The dominant way, at least that I was exposed to comparative politics in the old days, when I first started teaching, I was still a graduate student at Davis, and I started out as a teaching assistant. I was a teaching assistant in several comparative politics courses. And the way that it worked at UC Davis was that the professors always taught England. So, England, or Great Britain, as I'm going to call it. But Great Britain was the first country that was taught by everybody. Every professor I worked for said, you have to know Britain. It is expected in upper division courses that you're going to understand Britain. It is the most copied political system in the world, so students need to know about it. So every professor taught Britain, and so will I. The second course at the time, and keep in mind it was a different world in the 1980s, was the feeling was that if you were going to talk about the most copied democratic system in the world, then you needed to learn about the most copied dictatorship in the world. And so the Soviet Union was the second country. And then the third country was whatever that professor specialized in. So when I worked with my mentor, who was a European specialist, he almost always talked about Germany as his third country. When I worked for the Asian specialist, she would typically talk about China because that was her specialty. My favorite was working for our African scholar, and he would pick an African country, and typically it would be Nigeria, once in a while South Africa, or Kenya, for example. But all of these professors taught what we would call case study approach or area study approach, where you'd go country by country by country. And certainly that is what I am going to do in this course. So Britain, France, and Germany for sure. Hopefully Russia, and then who knows, maybe China, or maybe I'll get talked out of China and some other country, but we shall see. So halfway into this mini lecture, I finally get to your notes. If you look at the top of your page or your notes, if you're following along, comparative politics is both a subject and a method. As a subject, comparative politics examines domestic politics and governments within the country. So whatever occurs within the country, whether it is political parties, interest groups, day-to-day politics, public policy, we're interested in what's happening within that country. And again, whether it's inputs, whether it's institutions, whether it's outputs, we're interested in what happens within that country and then compare it, hopefully, to another country. International relations, which is actually my specialty, it was my major field. I wanted to study U.S. foreign policy towards the Soviet Union. That was my first love in graduate school. International relations looks at the interactions between different countries. Interactions are not just war and peace issues. International relations may look at an interaction like international trade. Do you want to, for example, lower trade barriers? This was the number one objective of the United States after World War II, was to lower trade barriers. We call these tariffs between countries. One of the great honors that I had as a young man is that I had a brief internship at the United States Institute of Peace. I was thinking about doing international diplomacy. I was really interested in negotiations and diplomacy, and I didn't get to do it internationally. I was a negotiator um, for contract negotiations for the faculty, but at one time I wanted to negotiate perhaps treaties and other things between countries. And actually, while I was at the U.S. Institute of Peace, I actually was offered a job to be an international consultant in terms of for big businesses. Should they invest in a country? Are the conditions within that country? Again, that would be comparative politics. Are the political conditions stable enough to invest large sums of money to build, for example, a plant? So a lot of people think that comparative politics and international relations are the same thing. They are very, very different. So we're interested in what's going on within the country. If you take a course in international relations, then you're going to be interested in trade relations, diplomatic relations. You may be interested in migration policy. You may be interested in international relations regarding maritime law, or law of the seas, or laws of space, or a variety of things where there are interactions between countries. Now, as a method, in this course, all comparative political scientists use comparative analysis. So my mentor, who had a dramatic influence on me, used to start his comparative politics class off by simply putting the decimal 0.367 on the board and would ask the class, is this good? Students would typically say that it's bad, it's less than half, that would certainly be failure on an exam. Students were thinking about the syllabus, 90% for an A, and if you don't, you have to get 60% to get a D. So 37% or 36.7% is failure. And then his answer would say, what if I told you that I was a Major League Baseball player? And that was really his first love. I think my mentor wanted to play center field for the New York Yankees. Instead, he became a world-renowned political scientist. And he would tell the class that this is my lifetime batting average. Most students would be confused, didn't know the answer, but usually there was at least one, and sometimes more than one, who would say, oh, that would be a very good average. And my mentor would say, it's better than good. It's the absolute highest lifetime batting average of any Major League Baseball player in history. That was Ty Cobb's average. Obviously, far better than good. So 0.367 in the baseball world for hitters, it's Mount Rushmore. It's the best that you can get. On the other hand, if you were looking at comparative basketball, NBA free throw averages, this decimal would not only be awful, it would be the absolute worst lifetime free throw percentage average. I think if I remember correctly, and this one's off the top of my head, so someone will probably look it up and correct me. But I think Chris Dudley or Ben Wallace, one of the two, had something like a lifetime free throw average of, God, I don't know, 411 or 421 or something like that. So it would, I think Ben Wallace actually was 414, if I remember right. I think Chris Dudley was 421. So the point is, if you were a batter, 0.367 would be the best of all time. If you were an NBA player and you were talking free throw percentage, it would be the worst of all time, and yet it's the same decimal. So comparative analysis is the only way that numbers really make sense. For example, I'm 6 feet tall. Is that tall or short? Well, it depends on your reference. Once again, when I was a young boy, I wanted to escape the ghetto by being an NBA shooting guard. 6 feet's pretty short for an NBA player. On the other hand, if I were a kindergartner or a first grader and I were 6 feet tall, I'd be an absolute giant, would probably scare the hell out of the teacher. So in this particular class, we are going to look at both subject and method in the world of comparative politics. We will talk about why we compare next lecture.